Grace Edwards learned how to count time by the sound of doors. The automatic glass doors of the convenience store slid open with a soft chime, too cheerful for a life like hers. Each ding marked another customer who would not look at her, another transaction that required no thought, no skill, no brilliance. Just hands exchanging money, just silence. She used to count time differently, by heartbeats slowing under anesthesia, by the steady rhythm of monitors, by the moment a scalpel met skin and the room held its breath. Now she counted minutes until the end of her shift. Grace stood behind the counter in her navy blue uniform, name tag slightly crooked, her reflection staring back at her from the glass refrigerator door. The woman looking at her was thinner than she remembered, quieter, older in the eyes. The fluorescent lights washed the color from her dark skin, leaving her looking like a shadow of someone who once mattered. Once, people had said her name with reverence. Dr. Grace Edwards, lead surgeon, rising star, the one they trusted when things went wrong. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. She didn't think about the United States unless she made the mistake of standing still for too long. Stillness was dangerous. Stillness let memories crawl out of places she had buried them. The operating room came back first, as it always did. The smell of antiseptic, the sharp, bright lights, the tension that crackled when she said, "We shouldn't proceed." She had warned them. The patient wasn't stable enough. The risks were too high. She had said it clearly, firmly. The way surgeons were trained to speak when lives were on the line. Her superior had smiled, waved her concerns away, and told her to assist. When everything went wrong, he disappeared. Connections made sure of that. Grace had stayed. Grace had tried to save the patient. Grace had been the one standing in the blood when the blame needed a body. Her reputation collapsed overnight. Hospitals stopped returning her calls. Colleagues avoided her eyes. The whispers followed her through corridors she no longer belonged in. Lawsuits, hearings, quiet suggestions that she should step away for a while. So she left. Korea wasn't supposed to be permanent, just a place to breathe, to disappear until the noise died down. She learned the language the hard way, syllable by syllable, apology by apology. She submitted applications. She waited. And waited. Foreign, black, female. A scandal attached to her name like a shadow. Eventually, survival won. Grace took the job at the convenience store because hunger was louder than pride. Another customer paid and left without a word. She bowed automatically, the motion practiced, empty. "I'm done saving people," she told herself, for what felt like the 1,000th time. Saving people cost too much. The clock above the register ticked closer to closing time. Outside, rain streaked down the windows, turning the neon signs of Mapo into blurred pools of color. The city looked distant, like it existed behind glass she could never touch. When her shift finally ended, Grace locked the doors and pulled her jacket tighter around herself. The rain soaked through almost immediately, cold and relentless. She welcomed it. Rain was honest. It didn't pretend to be kind. She took the alley shortcut home, the one she always used, head down, mind drifting despite her best efforts. That was when she heard it. A sound, low, broken, a groan. Grace stopped. Her first instinct was denial. Someone else would help. Someone else would call the police. She had learned that instinct carefully over years of self-preservation. Then the sound came again, closer, wet, gurgling. Her body moved before permission reached her brain. At the far end of the alley, half hidden by trash bags and shadows, a woman lay crumpled against the brick wall. Rain mixed with blood, turning the ground beneath her into something dark and terrible. Grace's breath caught. The woman's white blouse was soaked red. Her hands trembled weakly at her abdomen, where blood seeped between her fingers. A gunshot wound. Grace recognized it instantly, with the cruel clarity of training she could never erase. The woman's eyes fluttered open, and met Grace's. The world narrowed to that moment. The rain. The blood. The groan that sounded more like a plea. Grace knelt without thinking. She had buried this life, but it had found her anyway. Grace's knees hit the wet concrete hard enough to sting, but she barely felt it. The woman was losing blood fast, too fast. The rain didn't help, washing red into the gutter, disguising how severe it already was. Grace's hands hovered for half a second above the wound, trembling before muscle memory took over. Focus. The bullet had entered low, just right of the abdomen. No exit wound. That was bad. Very bad. "Hey," Grace said softly, her voice steady despite the thunder in her chest. "Stay with me. Look at me." The woman's lips parted, a shallow breath rattling out. She was middle-aged, elegant even now, dark hair plastered to her face, silk blouse ruined beyond repair. Not someone who belonged bleeding out in an alley. Grace pressed her jacket against the wound, applying firm pressure. Warmth soaked through almost instantly. Too much blood. Fear screamed at her to stop, to stand up, to call emergency services and back away before this became her problem. Instead, she tore open the jacket lining with shaking fingers and reinforced the pressure, angling her hand to slow the bleeding. Her brain shifted into the narrow, brutal clarity she hadn't felt in years. Airway, breathing, circulation. The woman gasped suddenly, her hand shooting out to clutch Grace's wrist with surprising strength. "No police," she rasped. Grace froze. "I need to call an ambulance," Grace said automatically. "You need surgery, now!" The woman shook her head weakly, panic flashing in her eyes. "No phone calls. Please, help me." Rain dripped from Grace's eyelashes as she stared down at her. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "You don't understand," Grace said, forcing calm into her tone. "You could die." "I know," the woman whispered. Her grip tightened, nails biting into Grace's skin. With her free hand, she fumbled inside her soaked coat and pressed a phone into Grace's palm. "Call," she said. "This number." Grace looked down at the device like it was a loaded weapon. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman didn't answer. Her head lolled slightly to the side, eyes fluttering. Grace swore under her breath. She repositioned the pressure, elevating the woman's legs with her own thigh, using her body to shield the wound from the rain. Blood lost control. "Keep her conscious." "Stay with me," Grace said again, louder now. "What's your name?" The woman's lips moved. No sound came out. Grace clenched her jaw. She dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Then someone answered. Grace didn't get a chance to speak. "Where are you?" a man's voice demanded, sharp and controlled, speaking Korean with clipped authority. Grace swallowed. "She's been shot. She needs immediate surgery." A pause, short, loaded. "Put pressure on the wound," the voice said. "Help is coming." The line went dead. Grace stared at the phone for half a second before shoving it into her pocket. Her attention snapped back to the woman as she adjusted her grip, ignoring the ache in her arms. Minutes stretched, elastic and cruel. The woman groaned again, fingers twitching. Grace kept talking, about nothing, about everything. The rain, the streetlights, the fact that she wasn't allowed to sleep yet. Anything to keep her awake. Her hands were slick with blood now, red streaks cutting through the rainwater on her skin. The streetlight above flickered, bathing the alley in sickly yellow light. Shadows jumped with every passing car at the alley's mouth. Grace was acutely aware of how alone they were. She thought of the hospital, of sterile floors and teams that moved as one, of never being alone with death. This was different. Headlights suddenly washed over the alley. Grace looked up, heart slamming against her ribs. One car, then another. Black SUVs rolled to a stop at the entrance of the alley, engines humming low and dangerous. Doors opened in near unison. Men stepped out, not civilians, not police. They moved with purpose, dark coats and sharper eyes, hands already near weapons they didn't bother hiding. Rain beaded on their shoulders like it feared them. Grace's body tensed, instinct flaring anew. She stayed where she was, one hand still pressed to the wound, the other raised slightly in instinctive warning. "She's bleeding out," Grace said, voice cutting through the rain. "You can't move her like that." None of the men answered her. They parted slowly, making way for someone else. A tall man stepped forward. He moved with unhurried precision, as if the rain, the blood, the armed men around him were nothing more than background noise. He wore a charcoal suit that looked custom-made, unwrinkled despite the weather, the fabric darkening slightly at the shoulders where rain touched him. Grace's breath caught. There was something in his presence that pressed down on the air itself. Power, control, violence held in check by will alone. His gaze dropped to the woman on the ground. For the first time, something cracked. "Mother," he said. The word was quiet, deadly. His eyes lifted and locked onto Grace. In that instant, Grace knew, with a certainty colder than fear, that her life had just taken a turn she would never escape. The alley went silent. Not the quiet of peace, but the kind that came before violence. Grace felt it immediately, the way the air tightened around the man in the charcoal suit. Every armed figure behind him straightened, alert, waiting for instruction. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He crouched beside the wounded woman, rain soaking into the knees of his trousers without a flicker of concern. His fingers brushed her cheek, reverent, controlled. The woman stirred weakly. "Min," she breathed. Relief flickered across his face, quick, restrained, before it vanished behind steel. Grace watched him with the same focus she reserved for trauma cases. He was dangerous, not loud dangerous, worse, calculated, the kind of man who didn't threaten unless he intended to follow through. "She's bleeding internally," Grace said, forcing herself to speak. "You need to get her to a hospital, now." His gaze snapped to her. Dark eyes, cold, assessing. "Move her," he said, not to Grace, but to the men behind him. "No," Grace said sharply before she could stop herself. "You can't just lift her like that. You'll worsen the bleeding. She needs immediate surgical intervention." He stood in one smooth motion. The world seemed to tilt as his full attention settled on her. "Who are you?" he asked. Grace swallowed. "Someone who knows what she's talking about." A dangerous answer. One of the men stepped forward, hand brushing the grip of his gun. Grace didn't move. Her hand stayed firmly pressed to the woman's wound. "If you move her without stabilizing her, she'll die," Grace said. "I don't care who you are." For the first time, something like interest flickered in the man's eyes. Then his jaw tightened. "Take her," he said. Hands grabbed Grace's arms. "What? Wait!" she protested, panic crashing in as they hauled her upright. She tried to twist free, but the men were strong, trained. A hood was pulled down over her head, plunging her into darkness. The last thing she heard before the world dissolved into motion was the sound of rain, and the wounded woman's faint groan. The ride was a blur of fear and adrenaline. Grace was shoved into a vehicle, forced down between hard bodies that smelled of gun oil and rain. The SUV roared to life, tires screeching as it pulled away. Someone pressed a weapon against her thigh, not threatening, just present. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "This is how people disappear," a voice whispered in her head. She focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Time stretched and collapsed all at once. She had no idea how long they drove. Every turn made her stomach lurch. Every stop sent fresh terror spiking through her veins. Finally, the car slowed. Stopped. Hands dragged her out. The hood was ripped away. Light stabbed at her eyes. Grace blinked rapidly, disoriented, taking in her surroundings. She stood in the middle of a vast, opulently furnished sitting room. Polished marble floors, leather sofas, Art she didn't recognize but instinctively knew was expensive. This was not a hospital. Her breath hitched. The wounded woman was wheeled in on a stretcher moments later, flanked by armed men. Grace surged forward instinctively. "Wait, she needs—" A hand snapped out, stopping her short. The man in the charcoal suit stood before her again, every inch composed fury. "Where is the doctor?" he demanded. Silence answered him. The men avoided his gaze. Someone swallowed audibly. Grace felt dread coil in her stomach. "She won't last long," Grace said urgently. "You're wasting time. She needs surgery, now." His head turned slowly toward her. "You seem very confident for someone who should be terrified." She lifted her chin. "I'm terrified of her dying." His eyes darkened. In one fluid motion, he drew a pistol and pressed it against her forehead. The room froze. Grace's world narrowed to the cold metal touching her skin. The weight of death balanced on a finger. "Give me one reason," he said calmly, "why I shouldn't kill you right now." Her breath shook, but her voice didn't. "I'm a surgeon," Grace said. Silence fell heavier than before. "I can fix her." For a long moment, he stared at her, searching her face as if trying to peel truth from bone. The gun didn't waver. "If we don't operate now," Grace added, quietly but firmly, "she will die." Something shifted. The gun lowered. He turned sharply to his men. "Prepare the emergency unit." Relief nearly buckled Grace's knees. He stepped closer, voice dropping. "You have 1 hour," he said. "If anything goes wrong, if she dies, you will pay with your life." His eyes bored into hers, merciless. "This woman," he continued, "is my mother." The weight of those words settled like a verdict. Grace nodded once. "Take me to her," she said, and followed the devil into the heart of his world. The emergency unit was hidden beneath the mansion like a secret, cold, bright, and impossibly well equipped. Grace froze for half a heartbeat when the doors slid open. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under surgical lights. Monitors hummed softly. Trays of instruments were laid out with meticulous precision. It was better than some public hospitals she had worked in back in the States. Cleaner, newer. Untouched by budget cuts and bureaucracy. Her chest tightened. She hadn't stood in a room like this in years. The stretcher was rushed in behind her, the wounded woman groaning faintly as they transferred her onto the operating table. Blood soaked the sheets beneath her. The monitor screamed its warning in sharp, relentless beeps. Grace snapped back into motion. "Vitals," she said, already pulling on gloves. "I need her blood pressure now." The men hesitated. They stood around the room with guns still in hand. Expressions hard, uncertain, soldiers trained to kill, not to heal. "Your guns are useless here," Grace said sharply, not looking at them. "What I need are your hands, now." No one moved. Her jaw clenched. She turned, eyes blazing. "If you want her alive, you listen to me." Something in her voice, commanding, absolute, cut through the tension. Slowly, reluctantly, the men lowered their weapons and stepped forward. One held the IV line when she told him to. Another applied pressure where she directed. A third passed instruments with clumsy but earnest speed. Grace moved like she had never left. The world narrowed to the incision line, to the weight of the scalpel in her hand, to the familiar resistance of skin giving way beneath precise pressure. Her hands stopped shaking, her breathing evened out. She was home. "Internal bleeding confirmed," she murmured as she worked. Voice calm, controlled. "Bullet lodged near the abdominal cavity. I'm going in." Outside the glass wall, Sung Min stood rigid, arms crossed, eyes locked on every movement she made. He hated this. Hated trusting a stranger. Hated the way his mother lay motionless beneath harsh lights. Hated that he could do nothing but watch. And yet, he watched Grace. Watched the way she commanded the room without raising her voice. Watched the certainty in her hands, the precision that spoke of years of mastery no scandal could erase. Even with armed men breathing down her neck and a death sentence hanging over her head, she did not hesitate. She was extraordinary. Inside the room, sweat beaded at Grace's temple as she worked swiftly, methodically. She located the bullet, careful not to cause further damage, controlling the bleeding with practiced ease. "Clamp," she said. It was placed in her hand instantly. She didn't look up. "Retractor." Done. The men followed her rhythm now, fear replaced with awe. Time dissolved. There was only flesh and blood and the quiet miracle of saving a life. Finally, Grace straightened slightly, shoulders easing. "Bleeding is controlled," she said. "She's stabilizing." The monitor's frantic beeping softened into a steady, reassuring rhythm. Outside, Sung Min exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. 45 minutes after the first incision, Grace stepped back, peeling off her gloves. Her arms ached, her back burned, but her eyes were bright, alive in a way they hadn't been in years. "She'll live," Grace said. The words settled into the room like a benediction. The men stared at the woman on the table, then at Grace, as if she had just performed something bordering on the divine. Sung Min entered the room slowly. His gaze went first to his mother, pale but breathing, monitors stable. Then it lifted to Grace. She stood there, exhausted, blood speckled on her sleeves, chin lifted, not defiant, not submissive, simply unafraid. "Escort her out," he ordered quietly. The shift was immediate. The men picked up their guns again. Grace's stomach sank. She followed them back into the sitting room, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. The adrenaline drained from her system all at once, leaving behind anger, hot and sharp. She had just saved his mother, and no one had said thank you. Sung Min entered moments later and took a seat across from her. The room felt smaller with him in it. "Tell me who you are," he said. Grace hesitated. Then she spoke. She told him about the operating rooms in America, about the night that destroyed her career, about being blamed, discarded, erased, about coming to Korea with hope and finding only closed doors, about the convenience store and the life she had buried. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he demanded her identification. One of the men brought it to him. He studied it carefully. "Grace Edwards," he read aloud. 28. "Surgeon." He handed it back. Moments later, an envelope and a phone were placed in her hands. Grace opened the envelope and froze. The money inside was more than she had earned in months, in years. "This is payment," Sung Min said evenly. "And this phone, when I call, you answer. No excuses, no delays. You will never speak of this place." His gaze hardened. "One mistake," he added, "and you're dead." He gestured to the door. Grace left with her heart pounding, her freedom intact, but fragile. She had survived, but she was no longer free. Grace didn't remember leaving the mansion, only the feeling of distance growing between her and the woman she had just saved, between herself and the operating room that had awakened something she thought long dead. She came back to herself hours later, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed in her studio apartment, rainwater still clinging to her jacket. The room smelled faintly of detergent and instant noodles. A single bulb flickered overhead. Normal, too normal. The envelope lay on the bed beside her. So did the phone. Grace stared at them like they might explode. She exhaled slowly and picked up the envelope. She didn't count the money. She didn't need to. The weight alone told her it was more than she had made since she started working at the convenience store. More than rent, more than survival. It was leverage. She slid it under the bed, out of sight, like hiding a weapon she wasn't ready to use. The phone was sleek, unfamiliar. Not her cheap prepaid device, the one she'd smashed months ago after dropping it for the third time. This one felt heavy with purpose. She turned it on. No contacts, no apps, just one number saved. Unknown. Grace's throat tightened. She leaned back against the wall, eyes drifting to the ceiling as memories pressed in. The operating room, the steady beep of the monitor, the way her hands had stopped shaking. For 45 minutes, she had been herself again. And that terrified her more than the gun had. Because she knew the truth now. She wasn't done saving people. She had just been forced to remember who she was. Grace curled her fingers into her palms. This wasn't a favor. This wasn't gratitude. This was ownership disguised as opportunity. When Sung Min had spoken his final warning, "When I call, you answer," it hadn't sounded like a threat. It had sounded like a promise. Grace closed her eyes and pressed her head back against the wall. She could walk away. Leave the city, leave the country, disappear again. But disappearance had already cost her everything once. She didn't know who Sung Min really was. She didn't know how deep his world went, or how many lives he controlled with a glance. She only knew one thing. He would call. Grace reached out, picked up the phone, and placed it carefully on the nightstand, screen facing up, like an eye that refused to close. She lay back on the bed, fully clothed, exhaustion dragging her under. Somewhere in the city, engines would be running, guns would be cleaned, orders would be given, and sooner than she wanted, the phone would ring. The phone rang at 10:45 a.m. The sound was sharp, invasive, too loud for the quiet hum of the convenience store. Grace jerked, nearly dropping the carton of milk she was stacking, her heart slamming so hard she felt it in her throat. She stared at the counter where the phone vibrated. Once, twice. Her first instinct was denial. Don't answer it. The store smelled of coffee and plastic packaging. Customers drifted in and out, indifferent, unaware that her life was splitting open again beneath fluorescent lights. The phone rang a third time. Grace wiped her palms on her apron and answered. "Yes?" she said, keeping her voice low. "Come out to Gwanghwamun bus stop," a man said. Not Sung Min, not even close. His tone was flat, efficient. "Someone will pick you up. Do not delay." The line went dead. Grace stared at the screen, her pulse roaring in her ears. No explanation, no request. An order. She glanced at the clock above the register. She had been on shift for barely 2 hours. Leaving now would earn her a warning. Maybe worse, but she remembered guns. Remembered being hooded, helpless, dragged into darkness. This wasn't a choice. She grabbed her bag and motioned to the other attendant. The girl barely looked up, scrolling through her phone, uncaring. Grace stepped outside. The city moved around her as if nothing had changed. Buses roaring past, people laughing, vendors shouting. At the bus stop, she stood with her hands clenched in her coat pockets, scanning every passing car. 10 minutes passed. Then a man appeared beside her like he'd stepped out of the air. "Follow me," he said. He didn't wait for her response. He walked fast. Grace jogged to keep up, her breath quickening as he led her into a narrow side street where a dark SUV idled. The door opened. She got in. No hood this time. The man sat beside her, eyes forward, saying nothing as the car pulled away. "Where are we going?" Grace asked. "All you have to do is your job," he replied. They arrived at a low, nondescript building, nothing like the mansion. Inside, hallways were bare, rooms sparsely furnished. She was led into a room that smelled of antiseptic and iron. 5 men lay on cots, blood, bruises, bullet wounds, knife slashes. Grace's stomach dropped. She understood immediately. She wasn't an exception. She was a resource. The man gestured toward the injured. "Work!" The door shut behind her. For a moment, Grace stood there, fury and dread knotting in her chest. Then a man groaned softly, pain dragging her attention back where it always went. She moved. She worked for hours, cleaning wounds, extracting bullets, stitching torn flesh. The equipment was basic, nothing like the emergency unit at the mansion, but it was enough. It had to be. By the time she finished, her arms ached and her head pounded. The door opened. The same man entered, holding an envelope, fatter than the first. "Payment," he said, extending it toward her. Grace walked past him, didn't even look at the envelope. The man frowned. "Take it." "No," Grace said. Her voice was calm, but it trembled with something dangerous. "You don't get to summon me like an object," she said, turning to face him. "There will be terms. I need to speak to your boss." The man stared at her like she'd lost her mind. He laughed softly. "You don't negotiate here." Grace reached into her bag, pulled out the phone, and smashed it against the wall. The crack echoed through the room. The man's smile vanished. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Grace met his gaze without flinching. "You want my hands," she said. "Then you listen." He hesitated, then pulled out his own phone and made a call. He spoke quietly, eyes never leaving her. When he ended the call, his expression had changed. "The boss says you're to come with us," he said, "to renegotiate." Grace exhaled slowly. She knew she had done something reckless, possibly fatal. But she also knew one thing with terrifying clarity. She did not belong to them. Not yet. As she followed him back toward the waiting SUV, her heart pounded. Not with fear alone, but with resolve. If they wanted her skills, they would have to pay more than money. Grace expected anger. She expected shouting, threats, maybe another gun pressed to her skin for daring to break something that belonged to them. She did not expect silence. The SUV didn't stop at the mansion. It drove past it, past the iron gates and manicured hedges, until the city thinned and the lights gave way to open darkness. The road narrowed. Trees pressed close on both sides, branches clawing at the night. The car finally rolled to a stop in an open field. A single cabin stood ahead, squat and weathered, its windows glowing faintly. Another black SUV was parked beside it. Sung Min stood outside. Different suit, same charcoal shade, immaculate even here, in the dirt and cold. His hands were clasped behind his back as he stared at the cabin, posture relaxed in a way that set every instinct Grace had on edge. She stepped out of the car slowly. "Sung Min," she began. He lifted one finger. Silence. Two men dragged someone out of the cabin. A man, middle-aged, heavy-set, his face swollen and bloodied. He stumbled, feet barely finding purchase on the grass as they forced him to his knees a few steps in front of Sung Min. Grace's stomach twisted. The man was crying. "No, please," he babbled in Korean, words tumbling over each other. "I was loyal, I swear, I didn't—" Sung Min turned his head slightly, finally acknowledging Grace's presence. "You wanted negotiation," he said calmly. "This is how it begins." Grace's mouth went dry. "What is this?" "Room," Sung Min replied. He looked back at the kneeling man. "His services are no longer required," Sung Min said. "Someone else is already taking his position." The man's sobs turned into choking gasps. Grace took a step forward without thinking. "Wait!" The gunshot cracked through the night. The sound was sharp, final. The man collapsed sideways into the grass, his body hitting the ground with a dull, unfinished sound that echoed far longer than the gunshot itself. Grace froze. Her ears rang. Her breath came shallow and fast. She stared at the body, at the spreading darkness beneath it, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. Sung Min didn't flinch. He handed the gun back to the man beside him and turned fully to Grace. "Now," he said, "there is space to talk." Her chest heaved as she fought the urge to scream, to run, to throw up. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "That—" Her voice broke. She swallowed hard. "That was unnecessary." "No," Sung Min said quietly. "It was instructional." The men around them stood impassive, eyes forward, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Grace felt something cold settle in her bones. This was power. Not loud, not chaotic, efficient. Sung Min gestured toward the SUV. Come. The ride back was silent. Grace stared out the window, the image of the man falling replaying over and over in her mind. She understood now, fully, finally, what she was standing in the middle of. Negotiation in this world was not about compromise. It was about cost. They arrived at a different property than before, smaller, quieter. Inside, Sung Min led her into a study lined with dark wood and low lighting. He poured himself a drink, did not offer her one. He leaned against the desk, studying her. You broke my phone, he said. You broke a man, Grace replied. A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You wanted respect, Sung Min said. Here it is. He straightened, voice steady, measured. You will be my doctor, he said. My surgeon. You will be treated with respect and protected as long as you remain useful. You will have a car for mobility. When I call, you answer. If you are unavailable, you inform me. And I decide whether your reason is acceptable. Grace folded her arms tightly, grounding herself. And if I say no? Sung Min's gaze didn't waver. Then someone else will take your place, he said. Eventually. The unspoken like him hung in the air. He reached into a drawer and placed a new phone and a set of car keys on the desk between them. Your payment will be doubled for inconvenience, he continued. No more destruction of property, no more public scenes. Grace stared at the objects. And my life? She asked quietly. You keep it, Sung Min said. As long as you play your role. She looked up at him. And if I don't? His eyes darkened. Just a fraction. Everyone, he said calmly, is replaceable. Silence stretched between them, heavy with what had already been lost. Grace knew the truth now. This deal wasn't about money. It was about survival. She reached out slowly and picked up the keys. Not because she agreed, but because she intended to stay alive long enough to matter. Grace knew something was wrong the moment the call came. No threats, no clipped orders, just one sentence. Come to the penthouse now. She didn't bother changing out of her clothes. She drove through the city with her hands locked tight on the steering wheel, heart thudding harder with every red light. When the gates opened and she was waved through without question, unease settled deep in her chest. The penthouse doors slid open. Blood hit her senses first. Metallic, sharp, wrong. Sung Min sat on the edge of the sofa, one hand pressed to his side, dark red seeping steadily through his shirt. Two men stood rigidly nearby, eyes alert, weapons ready, but useless. Grace dropped her bag. What happened? She demanded, already crossing the room. Ambush, one of the men said. Grace didn't look at him. She was already kneeling in front of Sung Min, fingers gloved, eyes scanning. The untouchable man was bleeding. The realization sent a jolt through her. Sit still, she ordered. He did. The bullet had entered high, just beneath his ribs. Grace pressed carefully, watching his reaction. He sucked in a sharp breath but didn't flinch. No exit wound, she muttered. You're lucky. His gaze stayed fixed on her face. You say that like luck exists, he said quietly. She cut away fabric, exposing skin warm beneath her fingers. Too warm, too human. This will hurt, she warned. It already does, he replied. She worked quickly, methodically, but her awareness of him was different this time. There was no glass wall, no distance. Just him, breathing, bleeding, watching her like she was something dangerous. The bullet hadn't fractured any major organs. She explained it to him as she worked, her voice professional, controlled. Still, her hands shook slightly as she cleaned the wound. He noticed. You're distracted, Sung Min said. I'm focused, Grace replied too quickly. His hand came up, wrapped gently but firmly, around her wrist. The contact sent heat shooting up her arm. Are you all right, doctor? He asked, voice low. Her breath stuttered. She nodded once, pulling free. Don't move. She finished quickly after that, bandaging the wound, instructing him to rest. When she stepped back, the adrenaline drained all at once, leaving behind something far more dangerous than fear. Awareness. For the first time, she really looked at him. Not the suits, not the authority. The man. He was young, too young for the weight he carried. Sharp jaw, dark lashes casting shadows beneath eyes that missed nothing. There was a stillness to him that felt coiled, restrained, devastatingly handsome. Grace forced herself to look away. "You're lucky," she said again, packing her tools. "Another inch and this would have been worse." He studied her. "You don't sound relieved." "I don't get paid to be relieved," she replied. That earned her something close to a smile. She turned to leave, and nearly collided with his mother standing quietly by the doorway. The older woman looked healthier now, stronger, alive. Her eyes softened when she saw Grace. "You saved him too," she said gently. "Just like you saved me." Grace hesitated. "I was doing my job." The woman smiled. "Then stay for dinner." "Let me thank you properly." Grace opened her mouth to refuse. Before she could speak, Sung Min appeared behind his mother, pale but standing. "It would be disrespectful to refuse an elder," he said calmly. "In our culture." Grace swallowed. Dinner passed in careful conversation. Sung Min spoke little, but he watched everything. His mother spoke of family, of hope, of wishing her son would finally leave the violence behind. Grace listened in silence, heart pounding. When she finally left, she exhaled deeply, relief flooding her as she drove away. Inside the penthouse, Sung Min's mother turned to him with a knowing smile. "She suits you," she said. "I see how you look at her." Sung Min didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Grace never saw them coming. She had barely driven 3 blocks from the mansion when the car behind her surged forward, headlights flaring too bright in her rearview mirror. Before she could react, another vehicle cut her off from the front. Tires screamed, metal groaned. Her car lurched to a violent stop. Hands wrenched the door open. A hood dropped over her head, plunging her into darkness thick with the smell of oil and rain. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat, but Grace crushed it down with practiced discipline. Fear wasted oxygen. She was dragged, shoved, bundled into another vehicle. The door slammed. The engine roared. Grace counted her breaths. In, out, in. This was not Sung Min's way. That realization steadied her more than terror ever could. The ride was longer than before, rougher, less polished. When the vehicle finally stopped, she was pulled out, guided across uneven ground. Gravel crunched beneath her shoes. A door creaked open. The hood came off. Grace blinked against harsh fluorescent lights. An empty warehouse stretched around her. Concrete floors, steel beams, shadows stacked in corners like waiting threats. Armed men stood scattered along the walls, watching her with open curiosity. None of them touched her. Then he stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered. A long scar ran down the side of his face, pale against darker skin, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent half-smile. Ji-ho. She knew his name without being told. "So," he said, voice smooth, amused. "You're the doctor." Grace straightened slowly, meeting his gaze. "I'm guessing you didn't bring me here to apologize." He laughed, genuine and loud. "I've been wanting to meet you. You've been making waves." "Kidnapping isn't the best way to make an introduction," Grace replied evenly. Ji-ho's smile widened. "Depends on the kind of people you're dealing with." She scanned the room quickly. Exits, numbers, weapons. Her chances of escape were slim at best. So she did the only thing she could. She took control of the conversation. "What do you want?" she asked. Ji-ho tilted his head, studying her. "Straight to the point. I like that. I want Sung Min to choose." "Choose what?" "Between you," he said casually, "and a piece of land we've been fighting over for years." Grace's pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. "And if he doesn't?" Ji-ho shrugged. Then you die. There it was, clean, simple. Grace nodded once. You won't kill me. Ji-ho raised a brow. Confident. You need me alive, she said. Otherwise you lose your leverage, and you don't strike me as careless. A flicker of approval crossed his face. Interesting, he murmured. No screaming, no begging. I don't beg, Grace replied. I negotiate. Ji-ho laughed again. Now I really see why he likes you. Her jaw tightened. Don't flatter yourself. He stepped closer, invading her space deliberately. She didn't back away. Since we're waiting, he said, you can make yourself useful. I have men who need treatment. Grace's eyes hardened. I won't be dragged into your war. Ji-ho's gaze cooled. I could force you. You could, Grace agreed. But then you risk mistakes, infection, death. You don't want that. Silence stretched between them. Then Ji-ho smiled slowly. Fine, treat them. And I owe you a conversation. She nodded. Fair. They led her to a makeshift infirmary at the back of the warehouse. The injuries were serious. Gunshot wounds, shrapnel, untreated infections. Grace worked under watchful eyes, every movement measured. Ji-ho stayed nearby, leaning against a crate, observing her like she was both asset and puzzle. She felt his gaze constantly. You're calm, he noted. Most people break. I've already lost everything once, Grace said without looking up. Fear doesn't work on me anymore. That answer stayed with him. When she finished, Ji-ho clapped softly. Impressive. You said you'd talk, Grace replied, wiping her hands. Why does the land matter so much? Ji-ho hesitated, then shrugged. It was ours. Sung Min killed the original owners and claimed it. Gold runs through that land. Grace absorbed that quietly. And you're willing to start a war over it? Yes, she exhaled slowly. Then let me stop one. Ji-ho studied her intently. Let me go, Grace said, and I'll convince Sung Min to share the land. 50-50. Ji-ho burst out laughing. He'd never agree. He will, Grace said, or I'll come back and work for you instead. That got his attention. You'd switch sides? He asked, intrigued. If he refuses peace, she said calmly. Yes. Ji-ho stepped closer, eyes searching her face. Or maybe you're already in love with him. Heat flooded her cheeks. That's ridiculous, she snapped. Ji-ho smiled. Is it? He considered for a long moment, then nodded. I want it in writing. Grace extended her hand. Then write it. They signed the agreement minutes later. Engines roared outside. Ji-ho smiled as Sung Min's fleet arrived. Looks like your king has come, he said. Grace squared her shoulders and walked out to meet him, alive. The warehouse doors groaned open and the night rushed in. Grace stepped forward first, alive, unbound, calm. The armed men lining the warehouse stiffened, fingers tightening on triggers as Sung Min's convoy rolled to a stop outside. Engines idled low, predatory. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating her silhouette as she walked out with steady steps. She did not look back at Ji-ho. She did not run. Sung Min exited his vehicle slowly. His men fanned out around him in practiced formation, weapons ready, eyes scanning for bloodshed. But Sung Min's gaze locked onto Grace, and stayed there, unharmed, standing, breathing. Something sharp flickered across his face before it vanished beneath control. Well, Ji-ho said, voice carrying easily, this has been productive. Sung Min's eyes slid to him, cold and lethal. Release her. Ji-ho laughed. Already did. He waved a hand casually. She walked out on her own. Grace reached into her coat and pulled out the folded document. She handed it to Sung Min without ceremony. I negotiated, she said. Read it later. Sung Min stared at the paper, then at her. You went behind my back. Yes, Grace said, because you would have chosen violence. And you think this was better? His voice dropped dangerously. "I think it saved lives," she replied. "Including mine." Ji-ho stepped closer, grin sharp. "She's impressive. Treated my men. Didn't flinch once." Sung Min's eyes darkened. "You touched her?" Ji-ho chuckled. "Relax. She made it very clear she doesn't belong to anyone." Grace didn't correct him. That silence spoke louder than words. Ji-ho leaned toward Sung Min, smirk firmly in place. "Your woman," he said lightly, "is more reasonable than you." The words hit like a slap. Sung Min moved before Grace could react, grabbing her wrist and pulling her back toward the car. His grip was firm but not painful, controlled. "You're leaving," he said. Grace yanked her hand free once they were beside the vehicle. "Don't do that." His eyes flashed. "You put yourself in danger." "I stopped a war," she shot back. "Something you were seconds away from starting." Ji-ho laughed behind them. "She's right, you know." Sung Min ignored him, opening the car door. "Get in." Grace didn't move. The night stretched tight between them. "Read the agreement," she said quietly. "If you refuse, I go back." His head snapped toward her. "To him?" he asked. "If you choose bloodshed," she replied calmly. "Yes." For the first time since she met him, Sung Min looked unsettled. Ji-ho raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'll be expecting your answer," he said to Sung Min, then turned his gaze to Grace. "Soon." He winked. Grace didn't respond. She got into the car. The drive back was silent, but it wasn't empty. Sung Min didn't yell, didn't threaten. His anger was worse than that. Contained, simmering, dangerous. The mansion had never felt so quiet. Grace stood near the tall windows of Sung Min's private study, the city lights of Seoul stretching endlessly below her like a promise she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. Her heart was still racing from the confrontation at the warehouse, from the way Sung Min had looked at her, as if she had terrified him more than any enemy ever could. The door shut behind her. She didn't turn. "You crossed a line," Sung Min said. His voice was controlled, but the restraint in it was razor thin. Grace faced him slowly. "You were about to start a war. That was my decision. And I made mine." Silence cracked between them, sharp and electric. "You went to Ji-ho," he said, stepping closer. "You let him look at you like I was human." Grace cut in. "Like I was capable of thought instead of obedience?" His jaw clenched. "You think I don't know what kind of man he is?" Sung Min snapped. "You think I don't know what he would have done if your plan failed?" Grace's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "And you think I don't know what kind of man you are?" The words landed heavy. She took a breath. "You said everyone is replaceable. That night in the field, you made sure I understood that." His eyes darkened. "You needed to." "No," she said softly. "You wanted to believe it." He stopped inches away from her. "Because if I don't," he said quietly, "then losing you becomes a risk I can't afford." The admission hung between them. Grace's breath caught. "You're angry," she said, "but you're not angry because I disobeyed you." His gaze locked onto hers. "You're angry," she continued, "because I almost chose another world over yours." The truth in it hit him like a blow. He turned away abruptly, pacing once, dragging a hand through his hair. "You have no idea what it means to be seen as weak." "I know exactly what it means," Grace said. "I lived it. I lost everything because I trusted the wrong power." He stopped. "I will not be owned," she said. "Not by Ji-ho, not by you, not by fear." He turned back to her, eyes burning. "And yet you stood between two men who would burn cities for less," he said. "And you didn't flinch." Grace swallowed. Because someone had to choose something else. They stared at each other, the space between them shrinking, not from movement, but from gravity. "You could have died," Sung Min said, voice rougher now. "But I didn't." "You offered yourself to him," he said, pain cutting through the anger. "I offered peace," she replied. "And you took it." His shoulders sagged. just slightly. I've built my life on control, Sung-min said. On never needing anyone. On knowing that if something breaks, I can replace it. He stepped closer again, close enough that Grace could feel the warmth of him, the tension vibrating through his body. You are the first thing I can't replace. The word stole her breath. If you had gone to him, he continued, voice low, I would have destroyed everything, not because of the land. Then why? Grace whispered. Because I won't watch you belong to another man, he said, or to this world. Her heart pounded painfully. Then do the right thing, she said. Choose something better. For a moment, he looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. Then he closed the distance. Grace barely had time to inhale before his lips found hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate. Years of restraint breaking all at once. Anger, fear, desire, relief. All of it poured into that single, shattering moment. Grace's hands came up to his chest without thought, fingers curling into fabric as she kissed him back. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Sung-min rested his forehead against hers. Finally, he unfolded the document and read. The room stayed quiet. When he finished, he looked up. 50-50, he said flatly. Yes. He closed his eyes briefly, then nodded once. You avoided bloodshed, he admitted. Against my instincts. Grace held his gaze. That's why you need me. A slow, dangerous smile tugged at his lips. Don't confuse usefulness with immunity, he said. I don't, Grace replied. I confuse it with survival. Outside, engines faded into the distance. Inside, two kings had stepped back, and one woman had proven she was never a pawn. Peace did not arrive with a gunshot. It arrived quietly, like breath returning after being held too long. The days following the warehouse confrontation were tense but bloodless. Messages moved where bullets once would have. Meetings replaced ambushes. Contracts replaced threats. The land was split clean down the middle, gold rights shared, borders redrawn with ink instead of bodies. For the first time in years, Sung-min chose restraint, and the world did not collapse. Grace watched it happen from the edges at first, standing beside him in rooms she never thought she would be allowed to enter. Boardrooms instead of basements, lawyers instead of soldiers, men in tailored suits speaking carefully, watching Sung-min as if they were trying to understand a version of him they had never seen before. A man who listened, a man who paused, a man who no longer reached first for violence. His mother noticed the change immediately. You walk lighter, she told him one evening, smiling softly as she poured tea, like someone who has put something down. Sung-min glanced across the room at Grace. She was seated by the window, reading through medical journals on her tablet, brows drawn in concentration. The same focus she wore in surgery. The same woman who had stood between two kings and refused to kneel. Yes, he said quietly. I have. Grace felt his gaze and looked up. Their eyes met. Something steady passed between them. Weeks later, Sung-min announced his withdrawal from the underground world. It wasn't dramatic. No grand speeches. Just a deliberate severing, handing control to people he trusted to dismantle what he had built piece by piece. His legitimate businesses expanded, swallowing the Shadow Ones whole. The world whispered. Rivals watched, but none challenged him. Not when Grace stood beside him. Her life changed too, slowly, carefully, on her own terms. Sung-min did not force her into hiding or luxury. He did not ask her to give up her work. Instead, he offered resources. Quiet ones. Introductions. Doors that opened without fanfare. Grace returned to medicine in a way that felt honest. Private clinics. Charitable hospitals. People who needed her skill, not her silence. Her hand steadied again over operating tables, her name slowly reclaiming its meaning. She saved lives without fear of being erased. At night, she returned to Sung-min's world, but not as a captive, as a partner. They argued sometimes, about power, about trust, about how much of the past could truly be left behind. But when they disagreed, Sung-min listened, and Grace stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she chose to. One evening, months later, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights of Seoul glittered below them, alive and endless. "I never thanked you," Sung-min said suddenly. Grace leaned against the railing. "For what?" "For not letting me become someone I couldn't escape," he said. "For choosing peace when violence was easier." She studied him. The sharp edges were still there, but softened now, shaped by something new. "You chose it," she said. "I just showed you it was possible." He reached for her hand. Not possessive, not demanding, just there. "You were never meant to survive my world," he said quietly. Grace intertwined her fingers with his. "Neither were you." He smiled then, fully, freely, without calculation. The devil no longer wore his crown. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet of the mansion that no longer felt like a fortress, Grace traced idle patterns against his chest. "You know," she said, "statistically, people like you don't get happy endings." Sung-min chuckled softly. "And people like you don't usually walk away from mine alive." She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "Guess we're both anomalies." He kissed her forehead, gentle in a way that once would have been impossible. "You saved me," he said again. Grace rested her cheek against him, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, human. She thought of the rain-soaked alley, the blood, the fear, the choice she had made without knowing where it would lead. She had saved a woman. She had awakened a surgeon. She had faced a devil and lived. And in choosing herself, she had found something even rarer than love. Belonging. Not as property, not as leverage, but as a woman who stood equal beside a man who had learned to lay his weapons down. Grace closed her eyes, wrapped in his arms, the city humming below them. She saved a man who should have destroyed her, and in his arms, she finally saved herself. Would you have stopped to help in that alley? Grace did, and that single choice rewrote her life. So now I want to hear from you. Did Grace make the right decision standing between Sung-min and Ji-ho? Or did she gamble too much with her own life? Was Sung-min redeemable from the start? Or was it Grace who changed him? And which moment stayed with you the longest? The rain-soaked alley, the execution in the field, or the kiss that changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading everything, because every choice leaves a mark, and this story doesn't end without yours.